Before we start, please join our growing family by hitting that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us and help us create more awesome videos. Over the years, a lot has been said about the infamous drug lord and leader of the Medellin cartel, Pablo Escobar, and there has been no shortage of controversial stories about him. His involvement in drug trafficking and bloodletting, as well as his hunger for fame and power, are common knowledge to all. But what many people do not know about the kingpin is that he had a secret obsession, an obsession that led to the tragic deaths of 49 teenage girls in today's video. I will be talking about the tragic fate of the 49 virgins used by Pablo Escobar in the beginning. Born on December 1st, 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was one of 7 children. His father owned a small-scale farming business while his mother was a teacher, so the family had little to survive on. After several years of living in abject poverty, Pablo became a gangster and engaged in several petty crimes in a bid to earn a living in his youth. Pablo was involved in a string of petty crimes including car theft, kidnapping, stealing, and reselling tombstones. Needless to say, he was already leading a life of crime before he got into the drug trade in the mid-1970s. The cocaine industry in Colombia grew rapidly because of the country's closeness to major coca-producing countries like Bolivia and Peru. Seeing that cocaine is derived from synthesizing coca leaves, drug lords in Colombia took advantage of this proximity to those countries. As a young man, Pablo spotted the cocaine trade and knew that it would lead him to the kind of wealth he desired, so he immediately started to lay the groundwork for his entry into the drug trade. It didn't take long for the ambitious criminal and his associate Carlos Lida to co-found the Medellin cartel. The cartel mainly dealt in the production, transportation, and distribution of cocaine throughout Colombia before expanding its operations to other countries. It was during this period that Pablo met the love of his life, Maria Victoria Henao, who is now known as Maria Isabel Santos Caballero. The pair tied the knot shortly after getting together, and until the end of his life, Pablo recognized Maria as his wife and the mother of his children. But he had a strong affinity to women and was known to keep many mistresses. Unfortunately, in addition to his seemingly unquenchable thirst for women, the drug lord had a peculiar and, quite frankly, illegal taste. He preferred to entertain only girls in their early and mid-teens. Escobar's desire for little girls who he believed to be virgins began even before he married his wife, but it got worse as he grew older and richer. According to Maria, she met Pablo when she was just 12 years old, and he was 23. She recalled that he was sweet, affectionate, and a gentleman who put in a lot of effort to woo her. Young Maria was drawn to the compassionate side of Escobar and his strong desire to help poor people. And so, despite the fact that many people would rightfully state that she was being taken advantage of, she fell in love with him. Like every well-meaning parent, Maria's parents were not in favor of her relationship with Pablo, but not even their disapproval could change Maria's mind. By the time she turned 14, Pablo had consummated the relationship with Maria, and soon she became pregnant. While recounting this aspect of their relationship, Maria recalled being too young to understand what was going on with her body. But of course, Pablo knew, and he immediately jumped in by taking her to an abortion clinic. 1 year after the abortion, Maria got married to Pablo. At the time, she was 15 and he was 26. According to Maria, the night of her wedding to the drug lord was one of the happiest moments of her life. Unknown to her, that was just the beginning of Pablo's hunger for teenage girls. Maria was the first of many young girls to fall for Pablo, and his dark desire would eventually lead him down a very dark path, feeding his obsession. At the height of his criminal career, Pablo started openly expressing his love for women, or more specifically, underage girls who he believed to be virgins. It was common knowledge that the boss of the Medellin cartel had eyes for virgin girls between the ages of 14 and 17 and was willing to go to any length to get them in his bed. Apart from being young and without any prior sexual experience, Pablo had other requirements. The girls had to be petite and delicate with long legs. Seeing how he could no longer roam the streets in search of prey, Pablo came up with the perfect plan to get these young, innocent girls. He created a group of handsome young men and called the group Los Señuelos. Members of Los Señuelos were tasked with finding and seducing young girls with the ultimate goal of sending them to Pablo's bed. Pablo and his newly assembled group targeted girls from poor neighborhoods, the ones whose families had no source of income and were in need of money. Some were promised small motorcycles, but the ones who were considered to be more attractive were promised cars. These young girls were told that all they needed to do to turn their families' fortunes around was to spend some time with the Medellin cartel boss. To make sure that the girls wouldn't have a second thought about sleeping with him, these handsome young men flashed wads of cash before their eyes and enticed the girls with it. The boss knew that money was enough to make the girls willing to sleep with him, so he gave Los Señuelos enough money to get the job done. Although money played a crucial role in attracting the girls, there were other reasons why the girl agreed with the Los Señuelos. It was widely perceived that Pablo Escobar was the perfect husband to his wife and a loving father to his children. He was also a generous lover. His reputation was enough to attract the girls. While some of the girls hoped to find love with the drug lord and become a queen in his empire, others knew that wasn't possible. The more realistic girls went along with Los Señuelos to meet Pablo because they had dreams and aspirations of becoming newscasters or television presenters, and they believed that Pablo could help them get the connections they needed because Pablo was having an affair with a famous television presenter. When the girls were recruited, they were taken to Pablo's special house in El Poblado, a very exclusive neighborhood in the city. The house was beautifully decorated to host multiple orgies and parties with Pablo's friends and the young girls. The parties were filled with food, liquor, good music, and girls. Pablo loved to have fun with these young girls, but it turned out he had much more sexual obsessions than taking the virginity of teenagers. During confession, Pablo's closest lieutenant and hitman, John Jairo Velasquez Vasquez, aka Popeye, stated that his boss also had voyeuristic tendencies. He confessed that Pablo was fascinated by watching lesbians make out. Sometimes he would pair heterosexual women with a lesbian. He enjoyed watching the heterosexual reach orgasms. And that wasn't all. Popeye mentioned that Pablo kept a briefcase filled with pleasure toys and would bring them out. Whenever he wanted to watch the lesbians, Popeye also stated that the orgies were open to cartel members who wished to join, but Pablo was particular about his privacy and would select a room for his wild nights. However, the hitman affirmed that Pablo would never try such escapades with his wife because he respected her so much. All the girls knew Pablo was one to take care of his women and was willing to spend money for his entertainment, but nothing could prepare them for the tragedy that was about to befall them. And the people of Medellin did not know the extent of Pablo's coldness until he unleashed it upon these young girls, the fate of the 49. One would think that being lured into the arms of a predator was the worst thing that could happen to these girls. Unfortunately, the brutality of Pablo Escobar was yet to befall them, and they had no idea it was coming. In the year 1987, the city of Medellin experienced 3 days of gloom when the bodies of 49 girls kept on popping up at intervals in different locations in the city. Some of the bodies showed signs of torture, while others were mutilated and had dozens of bullet holes in them. Police discovered many of these bodies on deserted roads in different parts of Medellin, Envigado, Itagüí, Bello, and La Estrella. The Colombian police, led by Commander Hugo Gilidoro Aguilar Naranjo, immediately jumped on the case to solve the mystery of the dead girls. And as the investigation proceeded, it became clear that there was only one culprit, the virgin-loving and police-evading Pablo Escobar. Commander Aguilar was certain that Pablo had murdered those girls, but there was a problem. No one knew what the motive was. If what they said about Pablo being the perfect husband and a good lover was true, what could have triggered him enough to order the heartless massacre of 49 girls? The police put all efforts into cracking the case, and before long they came up with 2 possible reasons for the massacre. The first theory was that the men of the Medellin cartel were trying to get information about their enemies from the young girls, and when the girls couldn't give them any useful information, they were killed. The second theory was that Pablo was on the run and narrowly escaped capture on a farm where he had taken shelter. So he thought one of the girls had outed his location to law enforcement officials. Torturing the girls to fish out the informant would have taken so much time, and Pablo had no patience for that. So he decided to deal with the situation in a way that only a cold-blooded murderer would. One of Pablo's hitmen confessed that to Pablo it was better to have a dead girlfriend than a resentful witness who could rat him out to the police in exchange for money. Pablo had considered his position and thought it was better to cut his losses. Sadly, his decision ended the lives of young girls and left their families heartbroken. Some form of clarity about the mystery appeared in 1991, a few years after the incident, when a girl who survived the massacre spoke up about it to the local newspaper El Tiempo. She was kept anonymous because disclosing her identity would have put her on the radar of the Medellin cartel. Everyone knew Pablo had a strict rule concerning people who dared to speak up against him, so the newspaper made sure to keep the girl's name hidden for her safety. The unidentified girl started by revealing the kind of person Pablo was. She spoke about his behavior, how he treated the girls that were brought to him, and how his sex parties worked. Her confession came at the right time because the year 1991 was the beginning of Pablo's downfall. No loose ends. The girl told El Tiempo that Pablo was a man of few words, but he was kind, calm, and had the qualities of a gentleman. She claimed that he would give fatherly advice to the young girls, but was not in the habit of talking about his problems with them. She also said that Pablo made sure he fulfilled his promises and was a trustworthy man. When the Colombian journalists asked her why Pablo ordered the massacre, she stated that Pablo always honored his rule. Anyone who snitched or betrayed him would pay the ultimate price, and even when a person did not snitch, if Pablo considered them to be a loose end, they would suffer the same fate. Pablo was a calculating man who always stayed 10 steps ahead, which is why he was able to evade the government for as long as he did. In all his dealings, he avoided mistakes, but above all, he dreaded loose ends. The king of cocaine was known for his willingness to do whatever it took to protect himself. Anyone could be collateral damage, regardless of who they were. One of the most important examples of how much Pablo hated loose ends is the brutal murder of one of his mistresses, Wendy Chavarriaga Gil. Wendy was a beautiful model that met and fell in love with the drug lord. Shortly after meeting, the two began a romantic relationship that lasted for 2 years before Wendy broke Pablo's no pregnancy rule. She had fallen pregnant and was carrying his child. Everyone knew that Pablo held his wife in high esteem, and some people even believed that it was out of respect for her that he was strictly against having children with his other partners, whatever his innovation was. One thing is certain: Pablo took his no pregnancy rule seriously. When she discovered she was pregnant, Wendy started to stay away from Pablo because she knew he wouldn't take the news well. Unfortunately for her, Pablo found out about the pregnancy when she was already 5 months gone. As expected, the drug lord wasn't pleased about the development, so he proceeded to handle the situation the only way he knew: violence. Wendy was already making plans to flee to the United States, but she was stopped in her tracks by Pablo and his men. The pregnant model knew that there would be consequences for her actions if she got caught, but nothing could have prepared her for what Pablo had planned. Pablo sent out his men with instructions to capture Wendy, sedate her, and then carry out an abortion without her permission. By the time Wendy woke up after the attack, she was in a pool of blood, and her baby had been forcefully yanked out of her by a vet doctor. In her devastation, Wendy made an attempt to escape by jumping out of the window, but she was stopped by Pablo's men. Unlike many people who would run away to the other end of the world after such a tragic experience, Wendy decided to stay and take revenge on Pablo. It didn't take long for her to come up with the perfect plan for her revenge, and her plan involved one of Pablo's closest lieutenants, John Velasquez, aka Popeye. As a beautiful model, Wendy used her charm to make Popeye fall in love with her. She hoped she could use him to get information about Pablo's whereabouts and hand the information to the police. The plan would have been perfect, but blinded by her pain, Wendy did not take into account the fact that Pablo was a criminal whose mind worked twice as fast as hers. She went ahead to kickstart a relationship with Popeye, who genuinely fell in love with her. Pablo caught wind of the budding relationship between the two, but surprisingly, he didn't have a problem with it. Instead, he gave Popeye permission to date Wendy. However, Pablo made sure to warn Popeye about her. He knew something was fishy, so he told Popeye to be extra careful, stating that she might just be after his money. Despite Pablo's warning, the lovebirds had several months of happiness, but it all came crashing down when Pablo's suspicions led him to secretly tap Wendy's phone. He discovered that Wendy was working with an elite police group created specifically to take him down. She had been trying her best to get his location so that she could feed the information to the authorities immediately. Pablo confirmed his suspicions. He called Popeye and ordered him to kill his lover. Popeye would later admit that he was so in love with Wendy that he couldn't murder her himself, but he was loyal to Pablo and knew he had no other choice, so he hired 5 other assassins to kill her. Popeye called his girlfriend one last time and asked her to meet him at a restaurant in town. Wendy, who was completely unaware that she would be walking into a death trap, agreed to meet. When she reached the restaurant, the hired hitmen opened fire on her and ended her life, killing 49 girls, an unborn child, and one of his lovers proved that. Pablo was cold enough to take down anyone who would serve as an aid to his end, the beginning of an end. During her tell-all interview with the Colombian journalists, the survivor opened up about some of the incidents that may have led to brutal massacre. She said that some of the girls put themselves in harm's way by eavesdropping on conversations they should not have heard, and that they made things worse by spilling everything they heard to anyone who cared to listen. She knew that staying alive around Pablo involved keeping her mouth sealed, but most of the girls couldn't keep their mouths shut, and that alone was their biggest mistake. To paint a picture of just how terrifying getting on the bad side of the king of cocaine could be, the girl narrated an incident in which the Medellin cartel's hitmen killed 2 of the girls who had gone to a party. One of the girls, named Sharon, took 28 bullets, while the other girl, Alexandra, was taken away by boat. The girl who was taken never made it back to Medellin because she was an acquaintance of Pablo's enemy. When asked if Pablo was cruel, all the survivor had to say was that he was very quiet and gentle. According to her, he always used protection when sleeping, keeping with girls, and knew how to treat a woman with care. Like I said, 1991 was a bad year for Pablo because he was finally arrested and incarcerated. But as a very influential man, he was able to work things out in his favor. The Colombian government had mounted so much pressure on him that he got tired of running and decided to negotiate with the government. He came to terms with the government, agreeing to stop all his criminal activities and turn himself in only if the government would give him a reduced sentence and some preferential treatment. He finally surrendered himself in June that year, but before he surrendered, he made sure the government wouldn't extradite him to the United States. He had been fighting the extradition law for years and had committed so many crimes to force the government into agreeing with him. He formed an organization with various drug lords called the Los Extraditable. Their goal was to make sure the government agreed to grant amnesty to drug lords and accept the no extradition clause. The organization had a motto which stated, "We prefer a grave in Colombia to a prison in the United States." For years, they warred with the government, manipulated the society in their favor by advertising their goals in newspapers. The government refused their wishes from the late 1980s until 1991, when the new Colombian constitution put a ban on the extradition of Colombian citizens to the United States. Pablo's efforts had finally paid off, so he agreed to turn himself in. But there were controversies surrounding the new constitution. People suspected that Pablo manipulated members of the Constituent Assembly to sign the new extradition law. Whatever the case, the government was relieved that the kingpin was finally in custody, and to keep their side of the agreement, they gave Pablo the permission to build. a luxurious prison for himself. The prison was called La Catedral. It was nothing like the regular prisons because Pablo built it to suit his lifestyle as a drug lord, the death of the drug lord. Although he was behind bars, the bars were not enough to restrict Pablo. He had a giant telescope installed at La Catedral. He was fond of taking a look into the city, and most especially at his daughter, every time he was on the phone with his family. The telescope was just a tiny bit of the luxury Pablo enjoyed in prison. He also had a football pitch, a giant dollhouse, a bar, a jacuzzi, a waterfall, and a nightclub at La Catedral. Although he was incarcerated, Pablo was still in charge of the Medellin cartel and continued his criminal operations from prison. Controlling the cartel was easy because he had access to phones, computers, and fax machines. It was worse because all the guards at the prison were chosen by Pablo and were his employees. However, it didn't take long for the government to change their minds on the preferential treatment given to Pablo because he used the prison as a torture house and murdered 2 members of the cartel there. News about the government's plan to move Pablo to a regular prison in July 1992 got to his ears from one of the numerous spies. Before the government could come for him, Pablo planned an escape from the prison and executed it under the government's nose. Pablo always knew that the day would come when he would have to escape from prison. So he arranged for the perfect way out from the very beginning. He was able to walk out of La Cathedral by going through a secret escape tunnel that was built when the prison was still in construction. The tunnel was hidden in plain sight as it was connected to a wall that was built with weak concrete. All Pablo had to do was kick the wall down, and he was a free man. The government soon announced his escape and declared a nationwide manhunt for the drug lord. The government put in all efforts to make sure that he was found. They went ahead to accept help from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. Pablo spent the next 16 months of his life looking over his shoulder because every law enforcement official was searching for him. To further enhance the search, the Colombian National Police deployed a special task force called the Search Block. Their only goal was to find Pablo Escobar dead or alive. Pablo tried everything he could to remain hidden from the law, but there was only so much he could do. Different measures were put in place to catch him, and it was only a matter of time before he slipped. Pablo celebrated his 44th birthday on December 1st, 1993, and on December 2nd, and he met his end that night. Colombian electronic surveillance team intercepted a phone call that piqued their suspicion. They later confirmed that the call was made by Pablo to his son, Juan Pablo. With the aid of radio triangulation technology, the team was able to track Pablo's phone to his hideout in Los Olivos, Medellin. The search block got to the location as quickly as they could. Pablo was caught off guard, and it was impossible for him to slip away as he usually did. He was with his bodyguard, Alvaro de Jesus Agudelo, also known as El Limón. When the officials arrived, they tried their best to make a run for it by climbing onto the building's rooftop, but their actions led the police to open fire on them. Pablo received multiple bullets to his leg, chest area, and 1 bullet inside his right ear, and that was the end of his terror and reign in Medellin. The death of Pablo Escobar elicited a joyous celebration from the members of the search block as they had finally rid Colombia of its most wanted criminal, Pablo Escobar, the beloved criminal. One would expect the people of Medellin to be filled with happiness and relief upon learning of the passing of Pablo Escobar, a notorious criminal who had terrorized the city and masterminded several violent attacks. However, in a shocking turn of events, that wasn't the case. The kingpin was buried on December 3, 1993, the day after he was killed, and thousands of people attended the funeral to pay him their last respects. The streets of Medellin were crowded by over 25,000 mourners who believed Pablo was a hero. Many of the people had Pablo's face on their t-shirts, while others carried signboards announcing that he was loved by the people. As the casket was leaving from the funeral home to the cemetery, the people on the streets entered a tussle to reach the casket. The fight to touch the casket was so serious that the Colombian police officers present couldn't do much to control the people. Pablo Escobar was laid to rest at the Cardenas Montenegro Cemetery, and the crowd followed the casket on foot all the way there. The people expressed their love for the drug lord, singing praises of his good works. Till date, the people of Medellin still reminisce of the good times when Pablo invested his time and money to develop the poor neighborhoods in Medellin. He was a generous criminal who spent millions fixing bad roads, developing schools, and giving the people the basic amenities the government couldn't give them. At one point during his career, he collaborated with the director of city planning to build 5,000 homes for the poor and homeless. His acts of philanthropy earned him the respect of the people and the title Robin Hood Paisa. Although he was a heartless killer, the people knew he was always ready to help those in need. Those who worked in his cocaine lab testified that he always paid them well so that they could have the comfort they desired. The surprising thing about Pablo Escobar was his ability to shift between roles. He was a hardened criminal who could take lives easily, yet he was willing to help the poor. He could abuse young girls and kill them, but he was also a loving husband and father at the same time. As horrifying as it sounds, killing 49 virgins is not the most heinous of Pablo's crimes.